Okay, shalom uvracha, folks. Thank you for coming on. I appreciate it. This shiur is to commemorate the 10th Yartzheit. I cannot believe it already. 10th Yartzheit of Rav Binyamin Eisner, affectionately known as Rav Benny. He taught for many years at Yeshivat Beit Midrash LaTorah, which was one of the flagship programs, one of the flagship, what we call now gap year programs, where people would go to study for a year after high school before going to college. And I studied in BMT for a year and a half, and I went back to the campus of BMT. I went back to the campus of BMT for another year after Gabi and I were married to study at the Grus Kollel, and Rabbeinu was still there at that point, and he had a profound impact on my life. He's definitely the reason why I am a teacher and a rabbi today. I see that Yerachmiel's on, and he, I think, knew Rabbeinu a bit. I see Todd Karaman is on, and he knew Rabbeinu. So I took this topic of Ahavat Torah, of loving Torah, because when I think of Rabbeinu, I really think that this is one of his great attributes and great characteristics, and something that just came across in everything that he taught. There was always a great sense of joy when he taught, a great sense of love of Torah, and palpable Ahavat Yisrael. It was so clear that he loved every single one of his students. He loved every single person he met and came in contact with, and that was also very palpable in his teachings. So I thought we would look at a few sources that talk about finding joy in Torah, and why that's important. I also want to make this comment about Rabbeinu, and I'm comfortable saying this because Sarah Eisner, Rabbeinu's wife, said this to me on one occasion. We were talking about Rabbeinu after he had passed away. Rabbeinu really was a Baal Machshava. What that means is Rabbeinu was he was a teacher of everything, but his real forte and his real expertise was in Jewish thought. And I believe, given the chance to choose what he would teach Machshava, he would teach Jewish thought. And I've thought about that for a while. Jewish thought, and not Gemara, not Halacha, not Chumash, although he taught and studied that obviously as well. But I think almost all the times I've studied with him was Machshava. We studied Jewish thought, and I've been thinking a lot about that and trying to understand that a little bit. And I think it has a lot to do with some of the things I'm going to teach tonight, and that is because Rabbeinu wanted everyone to love Torah, and he recognized, especially guys coming from America, from the United States, a lot of us coming with not necessarily the strongest backgrounds in Gemara, that Rabbeinu felt that teaching Machshava and teaching big ideas would endear us to Torah, would endear the Torah to us, and give us a chance to stake our claim, if you will, in Torah. And I think it was a purposeful move on his part to focus on that. And those of us who had the privilege to study with him in his study, he introduced me to the Maharal. He introduced me, of course, to Rav Kook. He introduced me to Ein Yaakov, the study of Agadah, and so many more aspects of Machshava. Kuzari, of course, was perhaps one of his favorite things to teach. He also taught Musar, which is also in the general category of Machshava, and Mor Nevuchim. And he introduced me and so many others to these elements of Torah as a way of giving us a love of Torah. So I want to I want to spend some time studying some sources that talk about the importance of loving Torah. Again, in memory of Rav Benny, who again, perhaps his greatest characteristic was that whenever he taught, he did so with great love. So let's jump right in. Here, there's a beautiful source in the Sefer HaChinuch in Mitzvah Tzadi Hey, Mitzvah 95 of the Sefer HaChinuch, where the Sefer HaChinuch is talking about the many aspects of Torah, what we call Shiv'im Panim LeTorah. This is something you may have heard, that there are 70 faces of Torah. If anyone has a comment or a question, please, you could put it in the chat, or feel free to use the raise your hand mode on the that you have there, and I'll try to see and try to get to you. So the Sefer HaChinuch here is talking about the Shivim Panim LeTorah, and he says, Yadu hadavar mefursam beinenu ha'am mikabei mitzvot ki shivim panim LeTorah. It's well known there are 70 faces of Torah, meaning there are so many different unique ways to understand the Torah. Uv'chol echad mehem sharashim gedolim v'rabim u'lechol shorash v'shorash anafim, and it just goes on and on. Basically, the Torah it's a rabbit hole, right? Once you get involved in a topic, you open up this sefer and you look at this commentary, and you just keep going and going, and there are numerous roots, and there are branches, and each one supports a great cluster of fruits that are pleasant for hearts to ponder. And that's the key, this notion that the study of Torah is something pleasant. And the beautiful language of the Sefer HaChinuch, that kol echad yisa eshkol gadol shel pirot nechmadim, right? They have pleasant fruits, and there's a notion of enjoying pleasantness in the Torah, and at the end of this source, the Sefer HaChinuch says, ki im ma'at v'im harbe mimena yochal kula metuka. Whether he eats little or much, it is all sweet. That if we find those elements of Torah, we have to search out the elements of Torah that we find sweet, and whether or not we learn a lot, or whether we learn a little, there is a sweetness. There is a sweetness in the Torah, and I want to look at this next source here from Ikvei Atzon from Rav Kook. Of course, anyone who knows, who knew Rav Benny, certainly studied Rav Kook with him. And so here's an opportunity to study a beautiful selection. Ikvei Atzon is a sefer. It's a collection of essays from Rav Kook. And Rav Kook here compares Torah to food, to a gourmet dish. And this is just so beautiful. I didn't learn this, Rav Benny. From Rav Benny, I came across it later, but it's a beautiful idea. So Rav Kook says as follows: L'shmirat hatam hatov v'harvacha hanafshit shel ha'adam biyachas l'mizono hagufani huchno ba'olam mechesed hamaspia l'kol chai ratzon baruch Hashem. So here, first, Rav Kook is saying that in order to protect or to protect and to give us a broad appreciation of the world, God made lots of different foods. Right? It's interesting to think about that. While there are so many different tastes, so many different types of food that taste differently, this Rav Kook is teaching us is a chesed, is an act of kindness that God did for us, right? Chesed hamaspia, so that we would all find things we like and be nourished. Minei mazon rabim v'shonim sheyicholim lehitchalef lefi kol echad ve'echad lefi matzavo ta'amo lefi zmano ulefi tkufat hayom v'hasha'a. Sometimes we're in the middle of something. We're in the mood for something sweet. Sometimes for something sour. Sometimes we want one type of food, another type of food. And so God made the world in a way that all these different things are available to us. Ulefi perak hashana umeshach hayamim. Sometimes when we're old, our tastes change. והתרחבות של הבחירה היא מתאמת אל הנטייה הפנימית בבעל חיים הטבעיים בתכלית שלמותם. And this wideness fits well, it's suitable to us. ובאדם רק אם הוא בריא בגופו ונפשו כראוי לו. And we take food, of course, that is healthy for us and that we like. And if we are in fact healthy, then we can appreciate all these different types of food. And then Rav Kook pivots to what he calls mazon ruchani, which is Torah, right? Spiritual food. Hamazon haruchani yesh lo gam kein ze haklal. This is really so beautiful. The same principle applies to spiritual food. And then the Rav Kook quotes a Gemara, Olam yilamed adam Torah b'makom shelibo chafetz. The Gemara says a person should learn in a place that they desire, which we generally understand to mean physically, right? Pick a yeshiva that has a derech halimud, that has a approach to study that suits you. Pick a rebbe, pick a teacher whose approach to Torah suits you. But Rav Kook says this doesn't only apply to the physical place. Al kein mukhrach hadavar shekol hakikar hagadol sheharchavata shel Torah yeh nagul lefanenu b'chol rechavo. In order to do this properly, in order to choose the Torah that we love, we have to be exposed to all types of Torah, right? It has to be revealed to us. B'chol miktsootav hashonim v'hamrubim, in all their different shades and all their different approaches, leman nochal liyot muchanim lechaven et hazman v'hanatiyah v'yachefetz hapnimi. We need to have an understanding of all the different types of Torah that are available, so that when we are in the mood for a specific type of Torah, it's at our fingertips. So I go back to what I said before. I really think that this is why Rav Benny focused on machshava. He wanted that to be, he knew that everyone else, the other Rabbeim, are focusing on halacha, are focusing on Gemara, are focusing on Tanakh. He wanted us also to have at our fingertips machshava, agada, so that because if that's what moved us, if that's what excited us about Torah, then it would be available. It would be available to us, and that's why I think this is such a beautiful passage and so appropriate to study on Rav Benny's Yartzheit. Lefi hachefetz hapani lirvot simonenu be'erech hamichuvein b'nitiyotenu pnima, in order so that our thirst can be quenched based on our inner desires. And so here we're seeing that there's an element, and by the way, this passage comes from an essay called Ha'oneg ve'hasimcha, right? Enjoyment and joy. Rav Kook is talking about the importance of joy and enjoyment in the life, in a person's life, and that also applies to Torah. We should enjoy the Torah that we learn, which then, of course, raises a question, right? The question is, if we're enjoying the Torah that we learn, maybe one would argue that Torah is not being studied for the right purpose, because we're supposed to study Torah because it's a mitzvah, and we're obligated to study Torah. But if we enjoy the Torah, maybe that removes that element of what we call lishma, the element of what we call learning Torah for its own sake. And maybe that's a lower level of Torah study. That exact question, which I think is a direct outcome of this essay, Ha'oneg v'hasimcha, that passage that we just studied, is directly addressed in a sefer called Eglei Tal by Avraham Borenstein, who, you see his dates here, 1838 to 1910. He wrote a very important sefer called the Eglei Tal on the various melachot of Shabbat. And in his introduction, he has this beautiful essay about why enjoying Torah is legitimate, and not only legitimate, actually may be the best way to study Torah. And here is the spirit of the essay in Hebrew. I'm going to read it in English. So he writes as follows: while we're discussing the matter, it's Torah study, I'm reminded of something I heard from a few individuals who err from the intelligent approach concerning the matter of learning our holy Torah. They say that one who learns and innovates, who rejoices and gains enjoyment in his learning, his approach is not learning lishma, right? Not learning for the sake of learning, as much as one who learns with simplicity, without gaining any enjoyment, any enjoyment from his learning. Rather, he should do so purely for the sake of fulfilling a commandment, right? So that's the question that we were just dealing with. That maybe if we're really loving the Torah that we're learning, it's not lishma, because now maybe we're learning it because we love it and not because it's a mitzvah. So the Eglei Tal says as follows: someone who rejoices in his learning, however, is of a lower level, as he is mixing personal benefit into his learning as well. So that's the end of the argument. In truth, this is a popular mistake. The opposite is the truth. For this is the primary form of the commandment to learn Torah, to be elated, happy, and rejoicing in one's learning. When one does this, only then will the words of the Torah be absorbed into his bloodstream, right? This is sort of obvious, that when we are learning something that we love, we're going to feel more connected to it, and we're going to remember it more. And it's going to become part of our personality. We're going to be drawn to it. And so therefore, studying Torah that we love is not only a perfectly good way to fulfill the mitzvah of Talmud Torah, it's the best way to fulfill this mitzvah, which goes back to the passage from Ha'oneg v'Hasimcha. If that's the case, then we have to find the Torah that we love, right? It's true, of course, we should study all aspects of Torah. But we should find Torah that we love, because that's the Torah that's going to stay with us. That's the Torah that's going to move us. That's the Torah that we are going to remember. And that's the best way to fulfill the mitzvah of studying Torah. Because he benefits from words of Torah, he becomes attached to it. Indeed, one who does not learn for the sake of the commandment to learn, and only in order to rejoice in the study, this is called learning which is not lishma. Like he who eats matzah without intent. Concerning this study, one should always toil without lishma, for through it one comes to lishma. However, one who learns for the sake of the commandment and enjoys his studies, this constitutes learning lishma. It is all holy, for the enjoyment is also fulfillment of the commandment. This doesn't only apply to the study of Torah. This applies to all mitzvot. Some people may enjoy visiting the sick. They do it because it's a mitzvah, but they also get a certain level of satisfaction from fulfilling that mitzvah. So not only is that appropriate, the Eglei Tal is arguing that is the best way to perform the mitzvah because it sticks with us. So I want to stop here for a moment and see if there are any comments or questions, or anyone have an insight that they want to share in this regard. I'll look around if anyone has their hand raised or put something in the chat, and if not, I'll just continue. Anyone have anything they'd like to add?
It says, if do it Hashem b'simcha, which means, so I think it relates that if you do it with simcha, with joy, it penetrates better to your body instead of doing it just for the sake of learning. So it's more technically. And then when you do it with simcha, it's with your soul and regesh, with your, how do you say regesh? With your feelings.
Feelings, yes, for sure. Right, that's true. There's an interesting debate that's going on about this still in the world of education, in terms of what to teach what to teach in a Jewish day school or in a yeshiva. Should we stick with the classic, with the classic curriculum of healthy servings of Gemara and Halacha, and traditional Gemara learning, or maybe the time calls for something else? And I understand both sides of the debate are interesting and legitimate, but this particular approach certainly lends itself to one approach to the debate. So those are a couple of sources about why it's important to enjoy Torah. I want to switch gears for a moment and ask a question. Right? How do we define success in Torah study? Right? The Torah study is a mitzvah, so it's important to be able to clearly state, I've studied Torah, and through that study of Torah, I have fulfilled the mitzvah. It's like any mitzvah. We'll just go back to Sukkot just a week and a half ago. It's a mitzvah to take the arba minim on Sukkot, but there's a specific way to do it. The lulav, the hadassim, and the ravot have to be on a specific side, right? The etrog has certain elements that make it kosher or not kosher. Same thing with the other minim. And if I don't do those things, even though I've engaged with the arba minim, even though I've engaged with those 4 items, I may not have fulfilled the mitzvah because I didn't do it right. And the same is with any mitzvah. So what is the definition of studying Torah right, so that I could say, all right, I'm going to come to my table, I'm going to open up a sefer, I'm going to learn it, and when I close it, I could say I fulfilled the mitzvah of learning Torah. So that's the question. Anyone want to take a stab at how to answer that question? Have you ever thought of that question before? Like another, on Pesach, we have to eat a certain amount of matzah to fulfill the mitzvah of achilat matzah. And if I don't, I've eaten matzah, but I haven't necessarily fulfilled the mitzvah. So maybe I could read some words out of a chumash, but is that it? Is that the fulfillment of the mitzvah? And I want to share something with Rav Soloveitchik, but I want to hear what your thoughts on this. How do we define properly fulfilling the mitzvah of Torah study? Feel free to unmute yourself and chime in. Anyone want to take a stab at this?
I guess maybe you could say if you are like studying like a specific topic, you're like, okay, I went over everything on this. I know all the details and I know how to apply it. Now I could say I've fulfilled the mitzvah of like studying about this part at least.
Okay, so Miriam makes an excellent suggestion. I'll let me know if I'm mischaracterizing it. That you study a certain topic, and the key word I think in your explanation was, now I know it. And now I know it. So I would ask the question, Miriam, you don't have to answer this question to everybody. Let's say I spend 2 hours trying to understand something, and at the end I don't get it. So were those 2 hours wasted? Right? Is that not a fulfillment of the mitzvah of Torah study? I see you unmuted yourself, Miriam, so go ahead.
I wouldn't say it's wasted. If you keep at it, probably eventually you might get it. So it's like, I don't know, if I only do half my math lesson, just because I can't answer the problem right now doesn't mean if I go back and do the other half, I might eventually get it. Like the first half wasn't wasted just because I didn't finish it or get to where I need to.
But we're still in that mode of ultimately all of this learning leads up to me knowing the material, which is very important. Okay, Amaka suggests in the chat
I think that idea, sorry, go ahead.
I'm just going to read something from the chat, David. This is an excellent suggestion that maybe it means that I'm able to explain it to somebody else, right? If I learn it and then I could teach it to somebody else, that means I know it or talk about it with someone else. So we're still in this very traditional framework, right, of knowing the details of what I've studied. Okay, David?
Yeah, I mean, I had two thoughts. One is that the whole idea of measuring it seems to run counter to the the Mishnah from Bikurim from Peah that we recite every morning, like Elu Hadrim Shein Lahem SHiur, that Torah along with other mitzvot are things that Dafka don't have a measurement, that any tiny amount that you do still counts and fulfills the Mishnah. So that would be an argument against the idea that there's some sort of quantum that you need to achieve to fulfill the mitzvah that it really has no measurement.
In terms of quantity.
Correct.
Right.
Or maybe there's even a quality aspect where
so that's nice. I like that. Meaning, I've never understood the Mishnah that way. I've always understood it as quantity, but it could be quality, right?
Right.
Yeah. Okay. Great.
And the second is that one could raise the bar very high and say the only Torah study that's really fulfilling the mitzvah truly is one that changes us for the good. I mean, one thing to get back to the previous text, lishma is usually translated for its own sake, but Rabbi Gordon Tucker has a different translation, which is Torah lishma means Torah for its intended purpose. That there's a purpose for the Torah. The purpose is actually to make us better people, to make the world better. And if you're not studying Torah with that in mind, and you're just doing it for pilpul or for navel gazing or to boost your ego, that you're kind of missing the point.
Oh, very good.
And I kind of like that because if the way the word lishma is used in the Gemara, often it's did I give this korban lishma for the purpose for which it was intended, or was it a korban pesach that I was thinking of a different korban when I offered it? And that's lo lishma. And so that's setting the bar very high, which is it doesn't matter how much you learn. If you're just learning it for your own edification, you're kind of falling short.
Beautiful. Okay, that's great. Thank you, Dave. We're gonna touch on that in a minute. I want to just say hi to my friend Yirmiyahu Fisher, who I see. I was wondering who Shoshana Fisher was. Now I know. Yirmiyahu was in BMP with me when we together studied with Rav Benny, and Yirmiyahu lives in Israel. It's great to see you, Yirmiyahu. And thank you for coming on. And Marie Beth, my sister-in-law, Gabi's sister, notes that in the bracha in one of the Birkot Torah is la'asok b'divrei Torah, right? The bracha we make is to busy ourselves or to be engaged or involved in Torah. So maybe there is no quantity or quality. It's just that we're involved in the Torah, and that is fulfillment of the mitzvah. And both of that comment and David's comment is a great segue to some two beautiful passages from the Rav, from Rabbi Soloveitchik. One is from a book called Drashot HaRav, which is a collection of essays based on Rabbi Soloveitchik's lectures. And in the context is one of the Rav's favorite topics was shlichut, the notion that we are God's shlichim, we are God's emissaries, and we have certain things we're supposed to fulfill. But in this essay, the Rav notes there are 4 differences between when a human sends an emissary versus when God sends us as his emissary. And one of those is what the Rav called mission equality. And this is really incredible. I only learned about this approach from Rabbi Soloveitchik when I was doing some research for this SHiur. I had some of these sources already, but I wanted to add, and I started looking into what Rabbi Soloveitchik had to say about love of Torah. And I came across these 2 passages. The first one, the relative significance of each person's assignment does not depend on the specifics of the mission, how much of the assignment he completes, or the lasting effect of the shlichut. No one can assess the relative importance of his divine assignment. Wholehearted acceptance and the will to carry out the assignment are all that counts. So if we apply this to Torah study, which is one of the things we're here to do, it's not a matter of the quality. It's not a matter of whether we complete it. It's just a matter of our wholehearted acceptance and the way we throw ourselves into the project. And then he quotes the Gemara in Masechet Brachot, Margala bipumaihu Yavne. The rabbis of Yavne had a common saying, Ani melachti be'ir v'hu melachto. Ani mashkim l'melachti v'hu mashkim l'melachto. I am a creature and my kal is a creature. My work is in the city and his is in the field. Kishem shehu eino b'melachti, ani eini mitgader b'melachto. Just as I don't involve myself in his work, so he does not involve himself in mine. Ukishetomar ani marbeh v'hu mamit, and if you would say that I accomplish a lot and that person accomplishes little, shaninu echad hamarbeh ve'echad hamamit ubilvad sheyechaven libo l'shamayim. Whether one accomplishes much or a little, as long as they do it for the sake of heaven, which really I think is what David was saying. Right? We do this for its intended purposes, for the sake of heaven. If we're engaging in Torah study for that and not for making ourselves great, Pirkei Avot talks also not supposed to make Torah a kardum lachbor bo, right? A shovel that we're supposed to gain personal benefit from. And so Rabbi Soloveitchik now analyzes this passage. The rabbis of Yavne had a sacred mission. Through every page of the Jerusalem and Babylonian Talmud, they guaranteed the eternity of Israel. Yet these same rabbis maintained that their mission was of equal value to their brothers in Galilee and Judea, who work in the fields, who provide food to their brothers in the cities. But what did these anonymous farmers accomplish of historical significance on behalf of the nation of Israel? We know well of Rabban Gamliel, Rabbi Elazar, and Rabbi Akiva, but of what lasting import is the work of these unknown tillers of the soil? Level of accomplishment is not what sanctifies an individual. It is the faithfulness in which one engages in his assignment. Holiness is associated not with the perceived success, but with the effort. Man is not judged by his accomplishments, but by the devotion through which he pursues his mission. So that's I just found that so moving and so comforting, right? Because I think this is so Rav Benny, right? That he threw himself into everything he did with wholehearted devotion, and I think that's that. And he didn't talk about it, but he left his students with the importance of zrizut, right? The importance of zealously serving God. And Rav Benny, for him, it was never about how much we knew or how much we remembered. It was about engaging in Torah study with all of our efforts and just doing the best we can. Echad hamarbeh ve'echad hamamit. Whether we accomplished a lot or whether we accomplished a little. And the next passage from the Rav, from Rav Soloveitchik, actually says this more explicitly. It talks about it in the context of Torah study more explicitly. And David, what you were saying reminded me of this. Rav Soloveitchik refers to studying Torah as a rendezvous with God, a rendezvous with Mother Shekhinah. And if that's the reason why we study Torah, then that's it. Then it's then we fulfilled the mitzvah through doing that. And so the Rav goes on to say that the Rambam writes that through various situations, despite the difficulty, we're supposed to study the Torah. And even if we're not going to remember anything, and even if it's going to be hard on us, even if we're not feeling well, we're still supposed to study Torah. And the Rav wonders, well, why is that? Right? Why is it that if we're going to study Torah under these difficult circumstances and not remember what we learned, right, shouldn't we delay the time of learning so that we're in a better frame of mind? And that's what the question Rabbi Soloveitchik asks. I'll find it right here. He says, if results count, a change of mind, right over here, a change of mind can be beneficial. It may raise the quality of the performance. A person who is hungry, in pain, cannot concentrate. The time he spends in study is a total waste. And yet Maimonides insists that the engagement be kept. Let us ask ourselves, what is the use of study without obtaining the regular benefits of the intellectual exercise? Wouldn't it be more profitable to postpone the date for a short period of time and resume the study of Torah after all physical handicaps have disappeared? The answer to this question was given already, and it is terse and clear. In respect to the rendezvous with the Shekhinah through the study of Torah, centrality has been assigned to the effort. The results are of marginal significance. I think it's really important to stop here and just think about who said this, right? This is Rabbi Soloveitchik saying this, right? Who was a tremendous Talmid Chacham and who spent his entire life focused on the results of Torah and trying to understand the Gemara and the Rambam and the other Rishonim and the whole topic and halacha with precision. Every word mattered. Every turn of phrase was analyzed. But yet, when writing about how to fulfill the mitzvah of Torah study, results, he says, are of marginal significance. The worth of the meeting between man and Shekhinah is determined by sincerity of the commitment, by the intensity of the dedication, by the warmth of the encounter, by the love and passion of the God-questing individual, and not by the brilliance of the performance. The Gaon, the genius, and the dull person, the great mind and the simpleton, share in the redemptive, hallowing experience in accordance with the effort. Lefum tsara agra. According to the labor is the reward. And I was just so touched by this. And I'll tell you something else that Rabbi Soloveitchik says elsewhere, but this here he's teaching us that I could be sitting in a SHiur next to the biggest Talmid Chacham, and that person is gaining and understanding and developing an intellectual expertise of the material, and I'm not getting a word of it, but I'm trying, and I'm there because I want to have this rendezvous with the Shekhinah. And says the Rav, that's it. That is the definition of study of Torah. Now, of course, if one does have the capacity, we should try to understand, of course. And as Miriam said, maybe we need to go back and review it and go back again until we get it. We shouldn't rest easy, and we shouldn't give up the hope of trying to understand as much of the Torah as possible. But that is really secondary, the Rav is saying, to the desire to have the rendezvous with God and to meet God through the study of Torah. And that was a really important aspect, I think, of Rav Benny's study. It was always a spiritual experience. It was always an opportunity to understand the Word of God. That was the purpose. And if we did, we did. And if we didn't, he still made us feel like we accomplished the world by just spending time studying Torah. And so that's really what I wanted to get across, these two ideas. And they are connected, that we should find the Torah that we love, because that's the best way to fulfill the mitzvah of Talmud Torah. We should attach ourselves to the Torah that we love. Now, of course, we should know and try to understand basic halacha so that we could live a life of knowledge and observance, of course. But most of us don't have the luxury to spend our whole day learning Torah. and we find ourselves maybe stealing some time here or there. And then the question is, what should we learn? And maybe the answer is learn what you love, because if we learn what we love, we'll probably find more time to do it, because that's the nature of life. When we love things, we find time to do it. And when we learn what we love, we'll remember it. It'll have a lasting impression on us. And as David said, it'll change us. It'll make us better. And the second point is we should go a little easy on ourselves, whether we leave that session of learning or that SHiur with a full understanding of what was said was wonderful and important. But the key was that we went. We went because we wanted to engage with God through the Torah. And that's the only way, the only two ways for us to engage with God: tefillah and learning Torah. In tefillah, we're speaking to God, and when we learn Torah, God's speaking to us. And when we go into it with that desire to have that rendezvous with the Shekhinah, as the Rav says, that's the whole ball game. That's how we measure whether or not we fulfilled the mitzvah of Talmud Torah. And whatever joy and love I have for Torah, no doubt I owe to Rav Benny, who taught Torah with great devotion and love for his Talmidim, and showed us a vision of what it means to have a rendezvous with God and to study Torah that excites, because Rav Benny was always very animated and excited in his learning of Torah. So those were the points I wanted to get across in his memory. And I know that I don't know everyone on this Zoom call, but are there any other students besides Yirmiyahu Fisher and Todd Kammerman who are students or who were students of Rav Benny who are on this call? Unofficially, okay. A lot of people were unofficial students just by hearing about him. Todd, do you have anything? Would you like to add anything?
Hi, Rabbi. How are you?
Hi.
I was just thinking actually about something I heard actually right after he passed away. I assume you remember Rav David Miller, who used to be the Rosh Yeshiva BMT, who's actually on a sabbatical the year I was there. But I listened to his eulogy, his hesped after Rav Benny passed away, and he told the story that he went to visit Rav Benny in the hospital. And this was, if you remember, I think Rav Benny passed away right after Sukkot.
It's today. Yeah, Parshat Noach.
And so he went to visit him. It was sometime during Sukkot. And he went to visit him in his hospital room. I guess it was in Yartzheit. And he walked into the room and no one was there. And he said his heart sunk. He was, he knew how sick Rav Benny was and he was afraid of the worst. But he found out he was fine, or at least relatively fine. And so he went around the hospital looking for him, and he found Rav Benny in the sukkah. And Rav Benny had basically careened two other patients who were total strangers and was teaching them Torah. This was, probably he was obviously terribly sick, less than a week before he died. But that's what he was all about.
Yeah. Thank you so much. That's a great story. There's another story that Rav Miller told. I don't know if it was in his eulogy, that I think Rav Miller said that he was on his way to the airport with his family, and his car broke down, and it was pouring rain, and they're stuck on the highway between Yerushalayim and the airport, and they have no way of knowing if they're going to get to the airport. And out of nowhere, Rav Benny pulls up in his little van full of his kids, who he summarily kicks out of the van, puts Rav Miller's family in the van, drove them to the airport, and then I imagine then came back for his own kids. So that was another really beautiful story. Yirmiyahu, do you want to add anything before we say goodnight?
I want to say something.
Hold on one second, Chana. Yirmiyahu,
Okay.
please.
Yeah, shalom, Barry. You hear me?
Yes, we hear you.
Okay. Yeah, the version of the story Rav Berzan told was a totally different family that no one didn't know me. He introduced himself. He did kind of announce this. I'm Benny, and even his family didn't know about why they were out of the car until later.
Okay, so I got some of the details wrong. Okay, thank you for clearing that up. Okay, it's really wonderful to have you. Yirmiyahu and I spent many a weekday night in Rav Benny's little dining room around his table, learning the letters of Rav Kook and so many other things. Okay, everyone, thank you. Oh, sorry, Chana, please go ahead.
No, I wanted to say there are so many pidgamim, so many phrases that can relate to this topic that you just talked about, like Yagata umatzata ta'amin, which means everybody puts his ability and his own efforts in the studies, and one can achieve very high level and one can achieve something there in the middle, but still both of the people are yegeim, are putting the efforts, the studying. Okay, so that's Yagata umatzata ta'amin can be a very good phrase for this. And also maybe, I don't know, I'm not sure, but maybe azurim b'dima b'rina יקצרו, you put your effort in your studies and you see fruits and you see the produce that you can harvest. So everybody is in own level, and one will have a big package of shita and one will have a smaller one, but both of them are harvesting.
Beautiful. Thank you, Chana, and thank you, everyone.
With my students, when I was teaching them, each student in his own level, as long as they put their efforts.
Yes,
So
yes,
it's
right.
yeah.
Okay, well, thank you so much for joining, everyone. I really appreciate the opportunity to study with you. And Rabbeni's neshama in the merit of our learning should have an aliyah, and we should all love the Torah that we learn.
Amen.
Have a good night, everybody.
Thank you, Rabbi Gama.
Amen. Thank you so much, everyone.
Laila Tov.
Laila Tov and good Shabbos.
Shabbat shalom.
Yirmiyahu, what time is it?
It's 10 to 6.
Oh, okay. It's time to go to davening.
Yeah, I have to go to shul now.
Okay, good Shabbos, Yirmiyahu. So wonderful to see you.
Yeah, your shkoyach and your SHiur.
Kol Tuv.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Bye. Good night, everyone.
תודה רבה.